So we figured out lye. You are familiar with lye safety. You are familiar with where to get lye and how to handle lye and how to mix lye. You are familiar with all the materials that you will need to source to make the soap. And you are also familiar with all of the ingredients that you may need to make the soap and, how to get them and all the things. So now you are ready for a cradle to grave soap making thing. We're going to make soap together. It's going to be fun. And I will tell you more about this section of the Back to Basics playlist for beginners and, just people who might need a refresher in just a minute. But before I do, hello, I am Mrs. Soap and Clay. Let's make stuff. How's it going, Sudsers? Welcome back to the channel. You are at Soap and Clay, where we make all the soapy things. And you are here for day 328 of 365 days of soap. And today, as I said, we are doing a cradle to grave soap making process. So we are going to weigh out our oils. We are going to prep our colorants. We are going to make the soap. I'm going to show you emulsion. I'm going to show you a fun pour. I'm going to show you the cut. I am going to show you where to store it for curing and all the things in one video. And this actually might be kind of complicated for me because I've been making soap for so freaking long that I do cut a lot of corners when it comes to the proper steps that you take in soap making. And so I'm a little bit nervous that I'm going to be able to get every single step of this for you. But I do also understand the importance of this because I get a lot of questions, and I see a lot of questions on the forums as well, about things in the soap making process that I don't really think about anymore. And so I'm going to try to keep those things in mind while we make soap together with a recipe and all of the things, which is something I usually don't show the whole process now. So let's get to the video because it might be really long. Okay, so we have already actually mixed the lye solution for this particular batch of soap in the first part of this video when I was showing you how to mix the lye. That said, this is cooled down to a very, very cold temperature. We are looking at 67 degrees for our lye solution. Now, I did tell you the best way to soap is to make sure that your lye is, lower than 120 degrees, and that super is. So you're going to get to watch a room temperature pour, and we can also talk about why I prefer to do a room temperature pour. But realistically, once you have mixed up your lye, which is always going to be the first step in the process, the next thing you're going to want to do is weigh out your oils and make sure that they are warmed up and fluid so all of the different oils that you have in the recipe are working together beautifully. This particular oil at this point has been heated up to 104 degrees, which is wildly different than the 67 degrees that our lye solution is sitting at, but we'll get there. Now, for the recipe, as I discussed yesterday, I wanted to give you a really easy recipe that would work well for all of your soaping in your beginning stages. And honestly, this recipe here is good for most soaps. You're going to get the good bubble from the coconut oil, you're going to get the bar hardening from the palm, and you're going to get the beautiful moisture from the olive oil. Now this is a 1 pound-ish batch. It's about 18 ounces when it's all said and done. We are soaping at a 5% superfat, which for first-time soap makers, I highly recommend you soap it at least a 3%, if not a 5%, just to make sure that in case you overshot your lye, you'll have some extra fats in the actual recipe that will not be converted into soap to give you that extra buffer. Now, the water to lye ratio here is 2.4 times water to 1 part lye. Now, during this chemical reaction, all you ever need is 1 part lye to 1 part water. So the water adjustments are going to do two things. One, it's going to give you a more fluid batter and much more time to work with during the pour itself. Two, it's going to make the soap easier to unmold and cut because it's not going to be a super hard bar. There is a trade-off when it comes to soaping at this high of an amount with your water though, and that is called, it does take longer to lose its water weight, or what other people call cure. Now, we will get to the curing process, later in the video, but because of this amount of water, it will be a softer bar for longer in normal circumstances. The reason that I soap at 2.4 times water to lye is because I put clays in each and every batch of soap that I make. And I don't just put like a little bit of clay. I make clay soaps, so I put in a lot of clay. For this particular recipe, we're going to be putting in 5% of kaolin clay, and that's not the amount that I usually, put in my batches. This is a nice light amount, really. So for a 1 pound-ish batch that's going to fit, in this guy right here, you are looking at 3.96 ounces of coconut, 3.96 ounces of palm, and 4.08 ounces of olive, which I have already weighed out in here and melted it all down so my solid oils are now fluid. And then to the lye solution that we created in the first video, 4.2 ounces of water, 1.75 ounces of lye. Now for the colors, I'm actually going to mix it up a little bit and not use Micas because I want to show you how the tougher colors work. So the neons and the pigments, because they can actually be harder to incorporate than Micas. So we will be dealing with Pretty Kitty, Grape Ape, and Flotation Device for this bar, which will be an in the pot, effectively 4-color swirl. Now in addition to all of that, we will be adding the scent at 5%. The amount of scent that you use is dependent on the scent itself and what the IFRA guidelines are for it. Now for soap, we are category 9. So yet another reason why I suggest you always go to an actual soap or candle making supply company to get your fragrances, because they will have those data pages there that you can look at and see what the maximum usage for a certain fragrance is. Now some companies are really good about this, and they will actually put the information right on their bottle. Midwest Fragrance is a good example of that. We are category 9. The max usage is 5.45%. That is a safety usage, and you cannot go above that. We are not using the Rose Bouquet for this particular one though. We are using a blend that I make for my Am I Bright bar. And that amount for that total blend, the max usage for it is about 10%. For the most part, I don't ever buy scents that you can't soap at least 5. And I also don't ever tend to put more fragrance than 5% in. I find that 5% gives you a really good, potent bar of soap that the scent sticks and stays a very long time, and it's all delightful. So that is what I mostly recommend, kind of a middle of the road, 5% for your fragrances, and you're good to go. Now you measure and weigh your fragrances based on the amount of oils that we have in the batch. Now with this particular batch, it's 12 total ounces of oil. And so the 5% of that would be 0.6 ounces. So you're going to put your container on the scale. Obviously, you're going to hit tare to make sure you've taken the weight of the container away. And then you're going to measure your scent out. Again, we are doing this all while the lye is cooling in the soap process. You're preparing all of the rest of the things that you're going to need for soap. I say in my classes all of the time, soap is 90% preparation and only 10% actually making the soap. Now using an empty beaker here and tearing out the scale, we can see that I have already weighed out my kaolin clay at 0.63 ounces, so 5% of the total oil weight as well. And I will be using water to disperse this. You can use oil or water to disperse your clays or any other dry ingredients. Realistically, most ingredients will go either way. One of the exceptions to that rule would be like bentonite clay, just because it absorbs so much water. It's actually usually better to use some of your oils to disperse it, so it will stay fluid and you won't get big dry chunks of bentonite that you have to try to work into your soap batter. Now we need to prepare our colorants. Now, I get asked this question a whole lot when it comes to colorants. And that question is, do you use extra oil, like a different oil, to disperse your colorants, or do you use your soap oils? And I go either way with that. Like, for example, I have a thing of hazelnut oil, right? If I were to take this and put a tablespoon of oil into each of these containers and then put my colorants in, that would be fine. I would just end up with a batch of soap that's going to be more super fatted. For cases like this, because we're making such a small batch of soap, I prefer to use the actual base oils. So the total amount, that 12 ounces that we have weighed out in order to disperse my colorants in each of these, will actually change the superfat kind of significantly in such a small batch. But for bigger batches, you can totally just use another lightweight oil, pour it in, mix your colorants, you're good to go. And just to give you a full idea of how much a tablespoon of oil would be, for example, like what it would weigh specifically, and not just an estimated guess based on the tablespoon itself, it's between 0.4 and 0.5 ounces for a tablespoon. So again, if you were to add an additional 1.5 ounces to an already very small, 1 pound batch, your superfat would increase not insignificantly. That's not the end of the world, but just for purposes of this and to make everything, easier on you, we're just going to go ahead and take some of the oils that we have used, that we have already melted down from the base oil, and use that to disperse our colorants. So these are the 3 colorants that we are going to use. We have Flotation Device, Grape Ape, and Pretty Kitty, all from Mad Micas. What I love about Mad Micas is it does tell you whether or not it's cold processed soap sable, whether or not it's approved for cosmetic use. These are pigments, these are fluorescents, neons, and they are not approved for cosmetics by the FDA. So this is something you can use in soap and you can use in crafts, which it says on the label. So do keep that in mind. Now, in order to figure out how much colorant you need, realistically, you should be going to the actual supplier and checking their website for that information. But I checked the website and it said that for a colorant like this, which is pigments are incredibly potent colorants. At Mad Micas website, it said that you should use 2 teaspoons per pound of oil in the soap. And that is cuckoo bananas. I have never used that much pigment in a soap ever. And so we're not going to do that. We are just going to use a little bit. Also, that said, these 3 colorants are not the base of the soap. They are accent colors. The base of the soap will be white, and these 3 colors will be used in a swirl to provide an accent. I also get a lot of questions about this particular pour, how to decide how much of your base you keep one color and how much you pour off for the rest. I have found that for a nice in the mold swirl or in the pot swirl, it's best to keep your base color between 60 and 70% of your total batch weight. So that's the oils plus the water plus the lye, which is where you're getting the 18-ish ounces. And then your accent colors will make up that remaining 30 to 40%. So in this case, I'm going to make this 70% white. So my base color is going to be white, and we're going to keep that at 70%. So then we take 18 times 30% to get the rest of the amount that we need here. So really, realistically, what that means is we're only going to be pouring out between 1.5 and 2 ounces of the soap batter once we've emulsified it into these 3 containers, which means we only need a really teeny tiny bit of colorant. And I don't have a really teeny tiny measuring spoon. I have a 1/2 teaspoon. So I am going to fill that maybe halfway and put that in and then close everything up. I like to sort of clean as I go in the soap making world, but also if you've seen any of my videos, you know that I am a very messy soap maker, or I can be depending on the project, and it's okay to be a messy soap maker too. Try to clean as you go. It makes the end process a whole lot easier after you've poured the soap. I am using a towel to wipe everything off between, so we don't have any contamination of the actual colors in the bags. But as far as one color ending up in another, it really does all work itself out in the mix, because there's more orange than there would be pink, for example. So if a little bit of pink ended up in there, it's not the end of the world. Now, because these colorants are so heavyweight, much heavier than a mica, which can reasonably be incorporated very easily either into your oils like this or within your actual soap batter once you've hit emulsion. Pigments are very heavy, so they actually do require a fair bit of work to mix them up. Now, this is one of those things where you could actually use a frother in order to really ensure that the pigment is well mixed. I used to do that and I stopped a very long time ago. It just got to be way too much work. And it was ultimately one more thing that I had to clean. So instead, I just take a whisk or a skewer and just really mix it really well and make sure it's reasonably dispersed, and then continue on with my life. And once the colorants are all done and we have all of that figured out, we need to do a double check on what we are, missing and what else we need to do. So we have the colorants, check, check. We have our oils, check, check. We have our scent, check, check. We have our kaolin clay, which we will put water in right before we mix it into the batch, check, check. We have our lye that has been cooled. We have a whisk. We have a spatula. We have a rag. We have a mold. And we have our stir stick. Okay, so now it is time to pour the soap. Now you can see that during that time as we were sitting here, these oils have already cooled down to 89 degrees. And so we are getting closer to that within 20 degrees of the lye solution itself, which is great. And if we were to let this go any cooler, we are going to be running the risk of false trace because we have so many solid oils in here. My coconut oil is 76 degree melt, and palm oil tends to melt at, I want to say it's 92 degrees. And so if we get too much lower with this, the solid oils are going to start to solidify once this lye solution hits, and we're going to think that we've hit trace when we actually haven't. That is one of the dangers of soaping too low. Now, as far as how you actually put your lye solution in, there are many people who say you should do it down the stick of your blender, down the shaft of your blender. There are others who just, sort of drizzle while they mix. I am a dumper and I've had none problems whatever, so I just do the dumpy dump. Put it all in, set this aside in the bucket or container, whatever you have, to get ready for cleaning. You want to keep that beaker well away from you so you don't accidentally use it for something else, because there's still raw lye solution in there. And then for the actual blending process, we are going to take the lowest setting that you have on your stick blender, and you are going to do a pulse and stir motion with this, because what we really want to do is find an emulsion. We don't want to find a trace. Now, the oils in here, the lye is already in there. They are not commingling yet. The lye solution is settled to the bottom because water, and the oils are up top. So we want to use this to start the process. It's a mechanical intervention to ensure that an emulsion is hit and we have a stable solution that becomes soap. And so what you're going to do is you're going to pulse for 2 seconds and stir for 2 seconds, watching it the entire time. Also, something that people say that you should do is put it all in at an angle to, minimize the potential of air bubbles. You can do that. It's such a small amount of soap that I'm going to go pretty dead on. Maybe a slight angle here, tend to soap just straight up and down, and I don't tend to have problems with air bubbles, but there's also that technique. So we're going to pulse and stir and pulse and stir, and we're going to look for an emulsion, okay? So you already see how quickly that color changed just by getting a couple, pulses in. And you also see how this right here is still a very transparent solution. You can see to the silver on the actual stick here, and you can also see little spots wherein there's clearly oil and water not mixing together. So you're at a nothing stage right now. This is the beginning process of making soap. It will continue to get lighter and the soap batter will get thicker as you continue to pulse and stir. Now you see that, just 2 more pulses, and it is getting whiter and it is getting thicker. You're starting to see a coating on the actual shaft of the stick blender. Now, did you see how much that just splashed over there? That is the reason why you need to have safety goggles on at all times in something like this, because that splash thankfully went that way and got all over my beaker and some actually into my scent. But if it had gone this way, it could have hit me in the face, and that would have been terrible. And also, as I've been sitting here talking about the importance of safety glasses, you saw how what looked like to be a pretty cohesive solution continues to start to separate. That means you are not at an emulsion. And once you hit emulsion, this soap will become soap no matter what you do to it. So that is what we are looking for, not a trace, not thin lines or thick lines or whatever you hear in all of that, because you can find that in false trace very easily as well. But even in a false trace situation, if you were to pull up your stick and just inspect it, it would start to separate off of the stick as well, even though it looks very thick inside the container. So I always recommend learning emulsion and soaping just to that. Now, as you can see, this is definitely becoming, whiter and thicker, and it is coating the head nicely. But as you continue to watch it, you can see it start to separate right there. We are still not at an emulsion. This separation is still occurring. Okay, now this is coating the head of the stick blender very nicely. And as you can see, it is getting thicker. It is getting this thick because, again, we are soaping at a very cold temperature. This is what I mean about false trace and why you should not rely on trace in order to soap. Because as you can see here, even though it looks thick in the container, it's starting to separate. We are still not at an emulsion. And also something to keep in mind when it comes to false trace, your soap batter might get very thick, but once it actually hits that emulsion and you work in your colors and your scents and whatnot, that batter does loosen up pretty significantly, because again, it's not the emulsion that's making it thick, it's the solidification of your solid oils and or butters that are doing so. Now, if you look at that, we do not have any separation going on here. We are now at an emulsion. And realistically, if you were looking for trace, you would think that we would be close to a medium trace just based on how this batter is performing in here. That's not true. We just hit emulsion. We are dealing with colder lye solution and colder oils that's leading to the appearance of a thicker batter here. Once we hit emulsion, what we do is we disconnect our head from the actual unit itself, and I scrape all of this soap batter back into the container. This is why it's important to get a detachable head, so you can do this without fear of getting hurt, accidentally hitting the button and losing a finger. That would be terrible. So now that we are done with the actual stick blender, that can be moved off to the side. You no longer need that in your workspace, and we can separate this and make sure everything is colored correctly. And then we will scent once we have the colors that we like. But before we do that, we need to actually include the kaolin clay. Now for the kaolin, because it's such a lightweight clay, again, using water to disperse it is completely fine. And it gives a nice fluidity to the clay itself, so you can easily blend it throughout your entire batch. Doing it this way also has the added benefit of giving you more water in your solution. So if your soap batter is already a little thicker than you'd like, this is going to thin it out temporarily. Again, the trade-off to that is you are going to end up with a bar that's going to take longer to lose all of its water weight and be ready for, selling. So do keep that in mind when you are working with extra liquids in your solutions. But the kaolin itself, also because clay binds to water, it is also sucking up some of that water, so it becomes its final finished form as well. Now, it is very rare that I actually get the scale back out in a pour once I have done the initial measurements of everything that I need. I tend to just eyeball these things. And that's great. At some point, you will get to that point where you can do it too. But until you actually have a good eyeball for what 1.5 ounces is, it's best to go ahead and get your scale back out and weigh it out proper. Okay, now nothing needs to be done with this guy right away. So I am going to set to work mixing my colors in really well to make sure that all the colorant on the bottom is well distributed through the soap batter itself. Now, using a whisk tends to make things thicker faster. And so if I'm worried that my soap batter is getting too thick, I will switch to a skewer or even a spatula to blend in my colors. A skewer or a spatula, especially a spatula that has a small head in a container this small, has the added benefit of ensuring that you're actually scraping the sides of the container and you're not missing any rogue soap batter and or color along the sides. Now remember, we did pour off a portion of the oils with all of this to actually disperse the colorants in, which means there's currently oil in here that has not gone through emulsion. And so it's loosening up the soap batter and making it more fluid temporarily. We are ready for the scent. The colors have been mixed in, they look amazing, and it is time to go ahead and put the scent in. Now, the bulk of the scent is going to go into the base color because that's where the bulk of the soap batter is. That said, there is nothing saying that you actually have to scent every single part of your soap. So if you want, you can just leave these particular colors unscented completely and put the bulk of it in here if you have a fragrance that is well behaved. So for this particular fragrance, it is well behaved, but I like putting a little bit into every piece anyway, especially for fragrances that don't discolor. Do the bulk of it in the white and then a little bit into each colored portion and mix everything up really well. And for this, I am not going to be cleaning off my bamboo skewer between the colors because as you can see, I went from orange to pink and it's not really changing that pink. It's such a small amount of orange that's left on the stick. It's not gonna make that big of a difference. Okay, so now we have our colorants, we have our soap batter, we have our scent. We are ready to go on to the pour, and the pour is an in the mold swirl for this particular guy. So it's time to get the mold out. Okay, now for an in the mold swirl, you can really do this however you want. This is one of the workhorse designs in soap making. A, it's a lot of fun. 2, you never get the exact same bar twice. And C, it's kind of just however you want to do it. For this particular bar of soap, which has been in my line for 10 years and is called Am I Bright, I have sort of a system for this. And so I put about 1/3 of the white down. And then I take the 3 colors and I pour about 8 inches from the actual mold. So gravity will do its thing and the colorants will get all the way down to the bottom. And I just sort of go in a back and forth, kind of an S curve with each colorant, trying to hit the white portions between with the next color. And then I take my white and right in the middle, I pour another 1/3 or so of the soap batter. And then I do the same thing all over again. And I did just switch the pattern with which I was pouring before, because before I went pink, purple, orange, right? And now I just did purple, pink, orange. That's okay. It kind of relies on it being kind of haphazard and wild, which is fun. Now, for the final round, I'm going to want to scrape all areas of my Pyrex using the flat edge of the spatula. A, to loosen up the batter that may have been just hanging out on the side and starting to get thick. But 2, to make sure that it all goes in, because you don't want to ever waste soap batter. And so I'm just going to take it and again put it right there in the middle, but use the spatula to help facilitate that dumping of the white. At the end of each container, I also do take the flat end and scrape out every little last bit of soap batter that you can. And immediately following that, I take a towel. A microfiber is usually better for these purposes, but I don't have one on the counter right now. And I wipe out the container that I just used. This will make it easier to clean later because there's less raw soap batter in there. So it's going to be easier on your pipes, on your plumbing. Now, at the end of all of this, we've got all of those swirls in. You can do a number of things here. You can take a bamboo skewer to this and go all the way down to the bottom of the mold and do some more swirls to really work the batter in. You can take a hanger to it. You could even take your whisk and go all the way down with it. Just remember that the more you work with the soap batter, the more the colors will intertwine and the muddier they're going to get. I'm not going to do anything with this because I want you guys to see what this looks like when you just do an in the mold swirl without skewering it. And I'm going to now create a pretty little top with the remaining soap batter that's in each of these beakers. Now there are tons of people online that are very precise with, or they say you should be very precise with how you put your soap batter to do your soap tops onto your soap. And I suppose I went through a phase where I super did that. And then I just stopped caring, because while a pretty soap top is my kryptonite, I'm a sucker for a beautiful soap top, I also don't have time to make it as pretty and pristine, because for every soap that I make, I have, 14 more batches on the agenda in the next hour. And so I have to book it. And so I don't tend to do super precise lines of the colors. I just kind of make sure that each color will be reasonably represented once we take a skewer to the top to swirl it, and call that good. And we're going to take a skewer to just the first little bit here. You're not going to put the skewer in any more than this. Now in some instances, again, you can put the skewer all the way down and swirl the whole soap batter, but all we're wanting is a pretty top here. So I'm just going to put it in and just do a figure 8 from one corner to the other, just kind of as I can. And then I'm going to run the edges a little bit just to clean them up, and it's done. Now, the next step in all of this for me is I spritz it with rubbing alcohol, I cover it with plastic, and I put it in the oven, in my custom soap oven for CPOP and gel. Gel is going to really make these colors very beautiful, and it's also going to ensure that you can get this out of the mold very quickly, which I always need to do. But also there are a lot of soap makers that don't like doing the oven thing, the CPOP thing, especially newer soap makers. And so we're not going to do that part. But what we are going to do is take some rubbing alcohol that is in just a little spritzer, and we are going to put a whole bunch on the top there. And what that is going to do, it's going to stop the caustic lye that's currently still in the batch and working on the sponification thing. It's going to impede that from hitting the air and creating what we know as soda ash. Soda ash is a cosmetic thing, is completely safe, but it's ugly. And with a beautiful top like this, I don't want ugly. So I spray it with a heavy dose of rubbing alcohol, and then I cover it up with some plastic wrap. And because we are doing this, for a back to basics, proper whatever, you guys get to actually experience brand new plastic wrap. But, go back to any of my other videos and you'll see that I reuse plastic wrap until it's just full of holes, because I don't like wasting things, really. So, there it is. At this point, this is actually safe to move if you would like. This is a very sturdy mold. You can leave it on the counter if you would like. You can cover it with a towel or a heat pad if you still want to do some version of CPOP, but we're not going to do any of that. We're going to leave it right here on the counter so we can look at it all together tomorrow. I mean, it's immediately for the video, but we're going to let this sit overnight, and then we're going to cut it and see what we're working with. Okay, so it is day 2. We have let this sit up overnight. It's been here for about 24 hours doing its thing, and now it is time to unmold and cut and see the pretty design inside. Now, for this, when it's on the counter for only 24 hours, because we have so much water in it, usually it's going to be hard to separate it from the mold itself. I recommend taking it and putting it into the freezer if you are running into that problem, so you don't end up with bits of your soap sort of stuck to the mold and therefore not as smooth of a side. But as you can see, this wasn't terrible to take out. At this stage, this is also a very, very soft bar of soap, and you see some shininess going on there. That is because I actually did put this in the freezer for a little bit so I could get this out for these purposes. Okay, now how to cut this guy. So as I said in the tool sourcing and the things that you need for making soap, I do recommend getting a cutter right off the bat. It's going to make your life a lot easier. I understand that it can be difficult to justify that expense, but even if it's just a cheese cutter that has the one, you know, thing, that's better than trying to do this by hand, because by hand is never going to yield as straight of a cut as you would like. But I am going to just go ahead and show you with the edges here a hand cut, and then take the rest of it to the proper cutter so we can see the pattern within that. 1 inch on either side, and I'm going to use 2 different types of tools with which to cut. First is going to be a big old, you know, kitchen knife. And the goal with all of this is to cut it as straight as possible. So lay it against that line you just created, reasonably straight on either side, and you're gonna hopefully push straight down. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. Granted, I have been doing hand cuts for a very long time, so it's not terrible. But as you can see, it's not as wide here as it is at the bottom. So that sucks. I, again, recommend getting a proper cutter for this as quickly as you possibly can. And for the design, it's very cute. We've got some little drop swirls going on there. Fun little pop of color right there in the middle. That was from when the second portion of white came in, really, and created that. And then some nice lines that went all the way down to the bottom of the bar because gravity. Love that. So that is awesome. That is one way to cut a bar of soap. Another way is to, if your soap is not too tall, to take a straight blade like a dough scraper. Same concept, but if your soap is too hard, you're going to have issues getting this through because it's not necessarily meant to be a cutting blade, if that makes sense. Also, I would like you to think about how long it took to pour this soap. Because I was spending so much time talking about all of the process, that footage was around 50 minutes long. That should give you an idea of how long a batter can stay fluid. And so do keep that in mind. Don't feel like you have to rush through a process, especially if what you are making is soap soaked at emulsion and not at a trace. You have plenty of working time if you have a good balanced batch of soap and you stop at emulsion to do the rest of it. So here's the cut from the dough scraper, and as you can see, much straighter. Don't hate that. That's delightful. So this is a good option as long as your soaps are going to fit underneath this thing here. Otherwise it smushes it and it's a bad time. So again, there that is. Very cute. Same sort of concept. And then lastly, we will cut the remainder with my soap cutter. Okay, so this is my soap cutter. Mr. Soap and Clay made this custom for me. It cuts 12 bars at a time. Has a nice long platform here, and it also has a stop on this side, so I can theoretically put a very huge slab of soap on it and not worry about anything getting weird when it falls. Love it. It is put through the ringer for sure. Thousands of bars of soap are cut on this every day. Now there are tutorials as to how to make these online. I have not done a tutorial on that because, quite frankly, when we did a tutorial on how to make a custom wood mold that you can line, there were some jerks in the comments about the process, and Mr. Soap and Clay decided that he's not going to share his information with the peoples anymore because they don't respect it. And that's, you know, a fair place for him to be. That is his prerogative. But you can find some things to make something similar online from someone else. Now, we're just going to put it between, and it slides like butter. It is absolutely beautiful. The cuts, obviously, it's crooked on that side because of one cut, but that cut there is straight. That is a nice cut. And the swirls and everything in there, also beautiful. That is lovely bar of soap right there. And the final piece, again, kind of crooked on this side because of that cut, but in the middle, that is a straight cut. It is nice. I understand that the soap cutters can be a pretty big investment right off the bat, but I promise you it's going to save you so much anxiety and heartbreak and just anger with the soap cutting process that it's going to be completely worth it in the long run. Okay, and now for the storing of the soapy things. These are like quarter sheet pans that you can get from the dollar store for, you know, $1 a piece or whatever. And I love these. They hold around 3 dozen bars if you're stacking them, you know, responsibly or whatever. And they are perfect to pick up and put on a shelf and just forget about while your soaps continue to lose weight. One of the problems with this is, though, they're very flimsy. And so you do have to remember that as you're moving your soap so you don't get a buckle at the wrong time and all of your soaps go flying. Now, for something like this, I do line it with some paper, and I line it so we don't have any interactions with the metal pan itself while it is curing. If you don't line it, you can have soaps that can take on a sort of yellowish tinge at the bottom. I do like to line them, so just keep that in mind. And then that's it. You're just going to put your soaps on your thing. And then you're going to store these, preferably low if you're in a hot environment. And in a, you know, shelving unit, cool, dry space. You guys can see what I use because it's behind me. So that's where some of my soaps do go for its losing of the water weight. And also preferably close to a dehumidifier to help these soaps lose their moisture as quickly as possible. But that's really it. That's the whole process. Take them, make sure to give them a little batch number. That's another benefit of the paper. You can write on here the date that they were made and your batch number, which would be a series of numbers that you have given. And also for funsies, you could go ahead and weigh these out right away and put the initial weight of your test bar that you're going to continue to weigh while you are watching these things lose water weight and know that they're ready to go, to be sent to people. At this point, these soaps are completely safe to use. Saponification has been completed and you can use them. But because they are so soft, they are going to disappear very quickly. So the longer that you can let these sit in open air and get as much air as possible circulating around them, the better. The faster they are going to lose that water weight and create a really nice bar of soap that, again, is rock hard, is long lasting, and has a big bubble. So do keep that in mind. As far as how long that is, that honestly depends on your recipe. And anyone who tells you anything different does not know what they are talking about. So that's it. That's the whole thing. It's cradle to grave. And there it is, a cradle to grave of your making soap experience. And yeah, actually, I went overly detailed in this to hopefully answer any questions that I have received over the years and questions that come up a lot in the new soap making world just because they're not really being answered. And so I hope you guys got everything. I hope I covered everything. There is one thing that I did not do in this process, and I would like very much if you guys would actually comment below what it is you think I missed, what I didn't do or show and or tell you. And that would be fun because I definitely did not do one reasonably important thing in this video. So, but that is it. That is definitely the entire cradle to grave process of making soap, of storing soap, of cutting soap, of where to cure soap, of all the things. So that should get you completely on your way to making a really good batch of soap and should be a great reference point should you have any questions, you know, later on in your process. So that's awesome. Next up in all of this is going to be substituting oils, because while we have been talking about recipes and the importance of fatty acids, we haven't really touched on how to tell what oil you can substitute, say if you run out of olive oil. So we will be talking about that in the next video, and the next one following that will be some fun design ideas. really, and the easiest way to achieve them. So there's that. I'm really thankful that you guys joined me for this one. I know it's definitely a longer one in the playlist, but in order to get every single step of the process and fully discuss it, I felt like a longer one needed to be done. So there's that. Special thank you always to my sudsers. Thank you for being my sudsers. You guys are amazing. A lot of this for a lot of you may just be refreshers and boring, because there are a lot of soap makers that have been doing this for a long time in the sudser community. But I am appreciative that you come and you watch anyway, even though it's a refresher. You guys are amazing. And so if you are one of those OG sudsers that are here, that have made soap forever and don't really need this refresher course, if you could type neon in the comments, that would be cool. That would help me know that you guys are here, and that would be fun. And also to the sudsers who are brand new to the game, don't be overwhelmed. You are good, and we are here to help you every step of the way. And I hope this was helpful for this step. I'm out of here for today, but I will see all of you guys again tomorrow for managing oils and how to substitute them round of Soapy Fun. Bye.